Hey there YouTube, Gabe from Nexus Core here with another One Piece card game deck profile to help you get ready for the deck limited battles that will be coming up within the next couple weeks. This time going in chronological order, I will be going over the starter deck 2 entry with green with the kid starter deck and the changes and swaps we can make now that we have access to two of the starter decks as well as the green promo. So without further ado, we will go ahead and get right into it with what should be the first obvious inclusion is 4 copies of Jewelry Bonnie, who, if you're not tired of hearing me say it in pretty much every other video I talk about green in, her effect is for 1 cost, 1000 power, and 1000 counter. You can pay 1, check the top 5 after resting her, reveal a supernova from them, add it to your hand, and bottom of deck the rest. Because it is a supernova and she is a supernova, you can add her with herself, which makes her very, very good. And now that we have access to a full suite of supernovas, she will never be whiffing ever again. And fortunately, I didn't have that problem during the event, but I like having better targets, including some targets. Next, we have 4 copies still of Capone Gang Beige, a 1/1 blocker who's a supernova, so he is searchable in those moments, and he's a 1/1 blocker, so there really isn't much more that we need to say about him. Next, onto the cost 2s, we are maxing out on 4 copies of a Rouge, because it's a crying shame they didn't give you a playset of him in the starter deck. He is a 2/3 with counter 1000. And while he has 1 Dawn attached, if you have 3 or more characters, this card gains 2000 power. This does work during your opponent's turn, so it's 6000 during yours and minimum 5000 during your opponent's, and it's searchable off of Bonnie, which makes him a pretty easy low to the ground attacker. You can get him out turn 1 if you go second, and easily fill up your board with a total of 3 because he counts himself with that 3, so being able to fill up a board to get to that low cost, high power card is very, very easy, and that counter 1000 is just gravy. Next, we are running 4 copies of Scratch Metapoo, who is a 2/3 with counter 2000, whose effect is Dawn 1. When attacking, rest one of your opponent's Dawn, and he is a supernova, so he's searchable off of Bonnie. This will never be played on the field. You run it because it has 2000 counter. The resting of your opponent's Dawn is just not worth it. Really, resting a single one does not do enough to justify it, especially because he only has 3000, so he needs 2 Dawn to hit a leader anyways, and you are losing 2000 counter. And if you're only resting one of your opponent's Dawn because you are telegraphing it by, playing a card with Summoning Sickness, your opponent can very easily play around it if they don't just outright kill it with something like Who's Who, or Jet Pistol, or Kaido, or King, or bounce it with Sables, or with Crocodile, or Doflamingo. You get my point. You are playing this because that 2000 counter is phenomenal and it needs nothing else. Next, on to cost 3s, our only cost 3 is going to be Killer, who is a 3/3 with counter 1000, whose effect is on play, KO one of your opponent's rested characters with cost 3 or less, and trigger, you can play this card. Very good because it's one of the few control options green has access to, limited in scope as it is, and it's nice because you don't need to waste an attack on a key card, like in the mirror match that you are guaranteed to be playing in. You can clean up Bonnie without having to waste an attack or risk the blocking and guarantee she goes. And there are plenty of other cards that you're going to want to hit, like Zoro or Jinbei if you're playing against red in this mirror match. Sentomaru if your opponent is silly enough to attack with Sentomaru while you're playing against blue, or any of the other low-cost blue cards. And Killer's just all-around solid card, and if nothing else, he is free board presence. Yes, he only has 3000, so he needs 2 Dawn to hit a leader, but still it is board presence with a solid effect on top of it that is searchable off of Bonnie for that free, sweet removal. Next, we are running 2 copies of the promo kid that you get in the promo pack that you should have gotten when you entered, who is a 3/4 counter 1000, Dawn 2, he gains double attack. I'm not going to mince words. This card isn't that great. There is a reason it will be cut once we actually get the proper Romance Dart support. The fact, though, that all we have is him plus the green starter deck means your options are very, very limited. The thing you would be running in its slot as a 3 cost is Vito, who, yes, he has 1,000 extra power, but really that effect, I think, makes up for the extra power, as much as I don't really care for double attack on low cost cards. But beyond that, it's a Supernova, so it is searchable off of Bonnie. And now that we have access to the full starter decks, we are running more copies of Law. So one of the things that Kid does have going for him that Vito don't is you can restand him with Law. And restanding double attack is a pretty solid way of making double attack threatening. Giving Kid a 3 Dawn makes him a 7k, which means your opponent is going to need to either use a 4k counter or at least 2 cards to stop it. And Law, while it costs 5, gets you a restand to do that again. And while that whole combo does cost you a total of 8 Dawn, that is still a very solid combo. And if you want to go full deep into it, you could give Kid 5 Dawn, make him a 9,000, so your opponent needs 2 cards to block, even if they have the 4,000 counter, and if they don't have a 4,000 counter, you're hitting with at least one of those. So I think it's solid as a tech slot. I just don't really think you need more than this, especially because it is searchable off of Bonnie, and it's really not what we're going for as the main cards, and it is pretty easy to work around. The Summoning Sickness makes it susceptible to removal. It has 4,000 base, which it's pretty easy to attack into, so only really needing 2 for those times you want to push, and also for another card you can hit with Bonnie. Next, on to our cost 4s. We're only running 2 copies of Kobe, who is a 4/6 vanilla with counter 1,000. It's the only card in the deck that isn't searchable off of Bonnie. We're running it solely because having a solid base stat is kind of good enough, especially now that it has the counter 1,000. That's really it. Being able to get out a 6,000 attacker on turn 2 if you go second, turn 3 if you go first, genuinely is good enough in the starter deck limited format. And fortunately, even though he isn't a Supernova, he is a Navy, he is a part of the Marines, so while he does not benefit off of Bonnie or off of Law, he does benefit off of Drake, so that 6,000 is quite easy to turn into a 7,000. So again, I think you don't really need more than 2, but it's solid enough that the vanillas are good, that in these early stages, that 2 is, I think, fine, and I do like being able to have Kid as a searchable option to go 2 and 2. Next, we're running, as alluded to, 4 copies of Diaz Drake, who's a 4/5 with counter 1,000. Dawn 1, while he is rested, your leader and your Marine... While he is rested, your leader and characters that are Marines, Navy, or Supernovas all gain 1,000. This counts himself, so he is basically a 7,000 attacker. And, well, now that we have cleaned up the deck list, literally every card in the deck is going to be gaining that 1,000 power, which makes it even nicer. And hey, this is another card that makes Kid even better, the promo Kid, because this turns promo Kid into 5,000 during your turn, so that 2 Dawn will get him to that 7,000, so it's a lot easier to put him into that threatening range. God help your opponent if you have multiple Drakes on board. So it's just another card that can help supplement that Kid. On to cost 5s, we are upping it to 4 copies of Basil Hawkins, who's a 5/6 Dawn 1. During your turn once per turn, after it battles an opponent's character, you can set it to active. This is fantastic. One of the things that makes it great, frankly, is that stat line. Having that 6,000 base is so good, and being able to clean up gummy board states with its effect is just so good that you definitely want to be maxing it out. The lack of counter be damned. Fortunately, we have the blockers to compensate. This effect is just so good, and it can just ruin your opponent if you're able to get it off well. And in a similar vein, we're running 4 copies of Trafalgar Law, who's also a 5/6 fantastic stat line, but he has counter 1000, who's on play. You can set one of your characters that is a Supernova or a Heart Pirate, though we have none of those, that is cost 5 or less to active. So, as I said, it's a great way of making the kid promo more threatening. But remember, Hawkins is base 6k. Drake, once you give it Dawn, is effectively base 7k. So even if you don't have the promo kid, you still have plenty of cards that can make for very strong, threatening pushes in the final stages of the game. So it's just another way of getting another attack while also getting board presence. I think in turns where you don't think you're going to win, Kid goes, Law is better than your leader's effect because Law will give you another card on board and you don't need to discard, whereas Kid is great for that push because that 5 Dawn will kind of go towards a bigger attack. I think that these are both really, really good, and you're likely to never to use them on the same turn. But the fact that you can use them after another sequentially just makes for such strong aggression. That's really what can push this deck over the edge in the deck limited format. And the last character we're going over is we are also maxing out our copies of Kid, who is a 7/7 blocker. Dawn 1 at the end of your turn, switch this character to active. So, we're running it at 4 because this is a fantastic card. We are running 4 Hawkins and a decent amount of events, so having more blockers to help is just always nice. But that blocker being on a 7,000 body is very, very good. This is kind of an easy discard target when you're playing against blue because you don't want to deal with Sables and max copies of Doflamingo. But in any other matchup, this card is incredible. Red doesn't really have an answer to this card, which is why you're running it at 4, because it just gets over the line for Jet Pistol. It also, as a 7 cost, just gets over the line for Kaido, and while Kaido does hit for 10k, the 9 cost Kaido, it's a 7k blocker, so it can really stop a lot of what your opponent wants to do. And it attacks for 8k and then blocks. This card is just so, so good. And I think it really shows what makes green so strong in the limited deck meta. Because there are so many cards, if you look at this deck, that are individually powerful. If you plan around double attack, it's good. Planning around it, like restanding it with Law. Hawkins is good for cleaning up board states and has a high base stat. Drake pumps up your entire freaking deck, and Kid is a 7k blocker that can attack for 8k once you give it the Dawn. There are so many cards that are individually strong, but they also work so well together, especially now that we have these upped copies, that it really cleans up some of the feelings that this deck can have of being slow. And I think that this really can help the deck sing in the end. Now that we've moved on and gotten a second deck under our belt. Now, moving on to the events at the end, though, we are running 4 copies of Straw Sword, who is cost 2, rest an opponent's character, trigger, play a Supernova with cost of 2 or less from your hand. You are probably never using that, unless you really need to get like a badge out that you wish you got out last turn. We are running it at 4, however, because as you can see, the deck does not really have that many options for control. The only other control card that we have in this deck is Killer, which can only kill a rested 3 or less, very specific, or Hawkins, which has to attack and it has to hit. But it also has to attack a character, so if your opponent doesn't leave any characters untapped or anything that you don't want to attack untapped, then you can't really deal with anything. So keeping things untapped is a way that they can protect themselves. So having Straw Sword be that answer to issues like that is very, very helpful. I lost a game because I played Hawkins and my opponent Straw Sworded my Hawkins and then attacked into it, and I couldn't do anything after that. Using Straw Sword with Hawkins is such a good combo. And the fact that Sword is searchable off of Bonnie because it's still a Supernova makes it even better. And even if you don't want to use it as a control tool, you can use it to rest a blocker. In that turn, where you want to use, say, Law and the promo kid, and your opponent has a blocker, you can rest a blocker, give Kid 3 Dawn for a total of 5, 2 for Straw Sword, 3 under Kid to make him 7, attack for 7 to leader with double attack, use your last 5 Dawn to play Law and attack for 7, double attack again as an example for a combo. But there's just so many ways you can use this card that makes it helpful to either ignore blockers, to get something that you want to kill with Hawkins that and make it attackable. If your opponent has like a low cost card that you want to kill and you really just want to kill it, you can do this and play Killer to get rid of a cost 1 through 3. There are so many ways you can use this card, and the fact that it isn't even cost restricted, so you can rest your opponent's 7 cost Kid in the mirror, makes this so good. And the trigger isn't bad. It's like you're probably not going to use it, but it's like it's definitely a case of rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And moving into the protective events, we are running 2 copies of Repel, who is pay 2, give a character or leader 4,000 and set 1 Dawn as active, and 4 copies of Scalpel, who is pay 1, give a character or leader 2,000 and set a Dawn as active, so basically the same thing, and trigger set 2 Dawn as active. The reason we're going 4 Scalpel and 2 Repel is this deck definitely has a bit of an increase in its Dawn curve. We are running 8 5 drops, 4 7 drops, and 6 4 drops. So you will end up spending a decent amount of Dawn, and if you want to use that Repel, you're gonna need to definitely probably curb your own turn in the aggressive push you can make. So the fact that Scalpel only costs 1 and also refunds itself basically means it's your copies 5 through 8 of a poo for your free, effectively free 2,000 counter. So the fact that Repel, while it does refund itself, the fact that it does cost that initial 2 is a thing to consider, especially because you want to, if you look at these cards, not only do they have decent Dawn cost, they also require Dawn for their effects. The Kid promo requires 2, Rouge requires 1, Hawkins requires 1, Drake requires 1, Kid requires 1, and you're not going to use your leader Kid's effect without giving him a couple more. So thinking a lot about that Dawn payment and trying to lower that curve really is why I'm opting to only run 2 Repels. But also, we have 4 Repels and 4 Apus for 8k counter, and 4 Kid and 4 Bej for 8 blockers. So the deck definitely has enough defenses in its arsenal that I don't really think we would need to up it. If I were to switch anything, I might drop a Scalpel and go 3 Scalpel, 3 Repel, but just based on how the Dawn curve of this deck has shifted towards the top end as we have upgraded it, I just don't really feel comfortable right now running more than 2 copies of Repel. But that is going to be it. Let me know what you think. Let me know what changes you are planning on making for your deck limited entry. And I hope to see you all in the next video, and get excited because I am going to, of course, be doing one of these Nakama Net Decks is the fun name I'm giving it, and I'm going to be doing one for the deck limited format for both Crocodile and Kaido to get everybody out. But that is going to be it for me. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.